Right, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the board of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. We are back to a virtual meeting because of government guidance to work from home. So unfortunately we're not in Ebbsfleet physically for this meeting, but hopefully we will return to Ebbsfleet as soon as we can to resume our board meetings in person. So anyway, welcome to the board meeting. Can I ask we are recording this and this will be put on our website after the meeting. So why don't we just get into today's business? James, can I check, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've got apologies from David Holt, and Councillor Murphy will be joining us a little later today.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much for that. And any declarations of interest? John?
Yes, please, Chairman. In respect of item 9 relating to Milton Road and Gravesend, it involves Gresham Borough Council, so I'll be declaring an interest on that. And for that item, I'll obviously leave the meeting.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for that. And Neil?
I have a standing declaration as a member of the Planning Committee, and that's recorded in the Register of Interests. But as far as paper 111 goes, the investment plan report, that includes a reference to the fact that work's been undertaken on the development of an outline planning application on Ebbsfleet Central. It doesn't refer to the details of that application. I intend to participate in that item, but if the discussion turns to the detail of the application, I will withdraw, and I will not participate on the specific item on Ebbsfleet Central later in the meeting.
Right, thank you very much for that, Neil. Thank you. Right, why don't we just now move on to our minutes of our last meeting, which was in the observatory in Castle Hill and Ebbsfleet, which took place on the 27th of October. We have those minutes in front of us. Can I just check whether those are a true and fair record of the meeting and the business on the day, and whether those are agreed?
Agreed, Chairman.
They are agreed. Thank you very much, board. Then we quickly move on to the board action log, which there are some items which are open there but are being progressed satisfactorily. And then we also have our forward look for our meeting schedule moving forward into 2022 as well. So I'm going to assume that that's all fine, and that brings us on to our first part 1 paper of today, which is the Chief Executive's strategic report. Ian, can I ask you to take us through that, please?
Thank you, Simon. A couple of things to note. In particular, in section 1, where I report on the health, safety and well-being, and that this section was written prior to the latest government guidance on working from home. So we, as I say in 1.2, we were looking at our guidance in view of the Omicron outbreak, but we have staff have now returned to working from home as per the government guidance. Very limited access to the office in case of very specific short-term tasks needing to be done. But that's to be expected. No other incidents, health and safety wise, involving staff or the observatory to be reported on. And as the paper says, any health and safety matters in respect of the investment programme are covered in the Director of Projects report. Turning to section 4, just a couple of points to highlight, really. Since our last board meeting, the board are already aware that the Board of Natural England confirmed the SSSI designation for Sonscombe Peninsula, and as the board are aware, this did cover the part of the land we own at Ebbsfleet Central, so that's just a record of that. Secondly, in terms of Ebbsfleet Central, wanted to formally note that we are in the middle of a consultation process which began last month, and that's running until the 14th of January. There've already been 4 in-person exhibition events which we were able to hold before any sort of latest restrictions came in. There've been a number of webinars, but the plans remain up on the online platform. So still getting a good number of responses, and as I say, that will run till mid-January. So we look forward to receiving views from community residents and stakeholders to the plans. And finally, I think at 4.5, really worthy of note that the strategic outline case for the delivery of phase 1 at Ebbsfleet Central received approval from the department's investment subcommittee last month, which is again a big step forward for this very significant project for delivery of the overall Garden City vision. So a lot of work now in train to prepare us for the next stage of the business case process, but that's a big milestone reached. Happy to take questions on anything else in the paper, Simon, but just wanted to highlight those couple of things.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. Board, do we have any observations or questions? Yes, Neil, can I bring you in, please?
Thank you, Simon. Ian, just a question on staffing. You say that a number of staff have left and there have been temporary gaps. And I noticed that later in the report there are perhaps rely on outside or agency staff. In particular, there's a reference to 2 posts in the planning team being covered by agency. And I just wanted to know whether those progress being made on filling the gaps and whether having the gaps has placed undue pressure on other members of staff and how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I mean, it is certainly the transition from there's always a bit of a gap when somebody leaves and before you're able to recruit somebody, and that has placed additional pressure on some staff. We we're very clear, I was very clear that where people are already working at maximum capacity, it meant we had to reprioritise, and we weren't able to maybe take some things forward at quite the rate that we might have wished, but we've now, I think, largely got through that process as we've been able to recruit and backfill some of those vacancies, and those staff have come in and got up to speed. In terms of the agency staff that you've mentioned, particularly in the planning team, Mark looks very carefully at how he meets sort of resource requirements. We do have a maternity member of staff on maternity leave at the moment, so that was a short-term requirement, so quite suitable to sort of fill with agency staff. We do try to put in place reasonably longer term arrangements with agency staff, rather than it's a couple of weeks, or you do need continuity in dealing with matters, and Mark manages that. I mean, Mark might want to say more about how he's particularly managing the resource, but yeah, we're very conscious of continuity with applicants and ensuring speedy and responses as well. So I don't know whether, Mark, you want to say any more particularly about the planning resource at the moment.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I can do. As Ian mentioned, one of those consultants covers a lady who's currently on adoption leave, and the other person is covering a role that was identified as sort of being a temporary role, which I would like to make sort of permanent in due course, obviously subject to spending with the outcomes. But obviously, if we'd have tried to secure some of those positions through permanent staff, I imagine that we would have had a longer gap to sort of manage. At least with having the agency staff come in, it means that we can mobilise those people a lot quicker. And I'm definitely happy with the people that we've currently got with us at the moment. So,
thank you, Mark. Nick, can I bring you in and then Bob, please?
Thank you. Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. So great news about the Department's Investment Subcommittee approving phase 1. Can you just expand a little bit on that? You know, at the whether there were issues, whether it went through very smoothly, and additionally, briefly, could you comment on the Environment Agency's comments on Northfleet Riverside and whether those are material issues?
I'll happy to deal with the first one there. I may want to not deal with the second one now because we've got Neil here in the planning committee, and these you're we'll be touching on planning matters. So to go into detail there now, I think we'd have to ask Neil to leave. So maybe we can pick that up when Neil's out the meeting room later, if that's helpful. But in terms of the first one, Nick, so we took the outline business case to the investment subgroup initially, and the investment subcommittee were a little concerned about the value for money that was being demonstrated, and asked us, you might remember I reported that they asked us to do a little bit more work looking at some of the local employment benefits, and we also looked again at the wider value uplift in the wider area. Following that work that we did, which they were very content with, we took it back, and it was agreed, I would say, quite smoothly, to having seen that. The essence of it was as a strategic intervention, sort of very well understood, but they wanted to be assured that if it went forward through the next stage, which is perfectly understandable, that there was every likelihood that it was going to be capable of showing an acceptable BCR, and they were reassured on that point when we took back the additional information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Bob, can I bring you in, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, I just wanted to add my voice to the congratulations to the team and to Ian and his whole team on getting that through, because it is not an easy BCR, benefit cost ratio, and it's one of the tightest ones I've been involved in for a long time. So I think the team's done extraordinarily well to get that through an investment subcommittee, which is a hard barrier to cross. So I just wanted to add my congratulations to the team and wish them well with the next stage.
Well said, Bob. Well said.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, Ian, look, thank you very much for this. Perhaps if I can just note, as contained in your paper, that the recruitment process for 3 new NEDs has gone live. I think that runs until the first week of January, and then we'll be running through a sifting and then an interview process as we look to replace 3 extremely good NEDs, Bob, David and Louise, who will be leaving us towards the end of January. But I'm pleased that with the involvement of the Cabinet Office and Number 10 that process is running now. So we look forward to some high quality applicants for that process. I'm sure it will be a fascinating engagement to be involved in moving forward. Otherwise, we appear to be making solid progress, and we await the outcome of the spending review that it relates to ourselves in the context of our bid into the department. So I'm going to assume that there are no further questions or observations on Ian's paper, and that is just for noting, so that is duly noted. Thank you, Ian. And that will move us on to Kevin, who is going to take us through the further work on our environmental action plan. Kevin.
Thank you, Simon. This paper is just really to confirm the agreement that we made at last month's pre-board discussion on environmental issues. And just to set that in context, in June 2020, the EDC board agreed a framework for environmental sustainability for the organisation as part of our overarching sustainable development plan. And from the June 2020 actions, we were asked to look at a roadmap to delivery of our overall ambitions, which were part of the framework, and also develop a detailed action plan as to how we were going to achieve the outcomes within the framework. So at the last meeting of the EDC board and a pre-board session, we looked at that in some detail about the progress we've made, about the actions we're now proposing, how we intend to prioritise those actions, moving forward. And we recommended some changes to the outcomes and timelines that we had specified originally. And we also shared with board members the principles and objectives and delivery for the action plan moving forward. So at this paper, we'd like to board to formally kind of endorse and agree what we discussed at the pre-board session in this formal forum.
Thank you very much for that, Kevin. Board, we have some recommendations in front of us. We have the paper. Can I ask if anyone has any observations or comments on this? Neil, please.
Thank you, Simon. First of all, I was unable to be at the previous pre-board discussion, and therefore I had a little bit of difficulty following precisely what was being recommended. And I looked at this as carefully as I possibly could. But there are recommendations in section 4, updates to the EDC Environmental Action Plan outcomes, and then to agree principles, objectives and roadmap for delivery as outlined, and then to agree, and I found it very difficult to work out precisely what it was that we were being asked to agree. And I would have found it helpful to have had those matters identified in the body of the report, because I then looked at the annex, and the annex is a discussion paper, so it was quite difficult to work out precisely what we're being asked to do, was the first point. I think I have, but I would welcome some clarity, because it is not easy from the papers. And the other thing is, in the Environmental Action Plan at 3.3, it says that the board requested Mark Pullin to provide a further paper and the potential impact an additional supplementary planning document might play. And I was a bit, well, I didn't quite understand what Mark was being asked to do, because we as a board can't promote an SPD. That would have to be a matter for Dartford and Gravesham, because they're the plan making authority. So I was just struggling, and no doubt you can put me out of my misery, to work out what it was that, are we asking the plan making authorities to do that, or are we or should we be looking at some other way to achieve these so-called improved contributions, and what are the improved contributions that we're looking for? So I just don't want us asking Mark Pullin to do something which he's not going to be able to do. So sorry, that was wrong observation.
No, Neil, that's very helpful. Look, Kevin, why don't you firstly talk us through what we're actually approving here and signpost us to that. And then Mark, obviously we had quite a discussion about this previously in the briefing session. So perhaps you can try and summarise, what you have been asked to do and what you think that can achieve. Kevin, please first.
Okay. Yeah, Neil, just to confirm, so the environmental framework that we looked at and agreed in June 2020, the changes that we recommend to those outcomes are one of the things we're asking to approve. So to be specific on that, in terms of outcome number 1, we're asking board to agree that EDC as an organisation will be carbon neutral by 2030, which was a change from our previous ambition for 2022, which when we looked in detail, that was unrealistic. We also asked to change the wording in the outcome framework, that instead of just depending on Ebbsfleet Central being our exemplar project, that we would use all EDC projects and sites to be exemplar, which link to outcome 3, 6 and 9. And then finally, we were just asking board to note that under outcomes 2 and 11, that we don't believe we can commit to those yet without further work. So the number 1 priority for our action planning moving forward is to get a carbon management plan. So we understand as an organisation what the baseline for that is and whether outcomes 2 and 11 are realistic. So we're just really highlighting that we need to do further work before we can commit to the dates on those. But what we were asking board to do was to note that point, and also then to agree the changes to outcome number 131 and then 369. Secondly, what we hadn't got in the previous framework was any of the action planning or the principles and objectives for delivery. So within the framework document, the appendix that you have today, it does set under each of the priority action areas our objectives for each of those, and we've also set a number of delivery principles in general that will cut across all of the action areas. So again, we were asking board to endorse those. The third area really was in terms of action planning moving forward. We discussed at the pre-board session that we would do that on an annual basis when we know that our resource availability, that we would then look at what our priority actions were for each year moving forward. So we were asking to agree that approach. And then finally was just a number of actions, including the one you referred to under Mark as our next steps, and just asking board to note those as well. So that's what we were sort of summarised from our discussion at the pre-board session last month.
Can I just, Ian, can I just bring you in, and then I'd like to go back to Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I think Neil's point is very valid here. I think it would help if we connected those things back into the main body of the paper, because you've got to flick back over to the set of slides. So happy to sort of be guided by you as to how you'd like to do this, Simon. But I think some recrafting and bringing those elements into the body of the paper would help for clarity, I think.
Neil.
I was just going to make a suggestion that perhaps when the minutes are drawn up, so that members of the public can see exactly what we have agreed, if we do agree it, that the minutes could reflect that. Otherwise, You've got a paper chase, which, if you've got Kevin to explain it, that's all right. But if you're a member of the public, you haven't.
Yeah, Neil, I think that's a very good suggestion. I was going to suggest that let's make sure it's captured in the minutes. So we will prove it here, but we'll make sure the minutes are crystal clear. So, Mark, can we move on to the SPD? John, you'd like to jump in before that?
Yes, please. On the basic document we've just been discussing, I think the EDC is lucky that it doesn't have to engage with the environmental groups, because if we did, this document, there'd be a lot of challenge of it, because it's not very clear as to what are we trying to do, when are we trying to do it, how we're trying to do it, and when do we start. So it's missing a lot of that sort of detail, which is quite basic, and I think most authorities have come to terms with the fact that we've got to understand where we are now, wherever the target being. Obviously Graham's 2030, others are different, and I'm not saying what it should be, but if you're going to have action points in there, they need to be realistic. My concern with this document, for example, on page 22, is there's an item in there that by 2035 we will be energy we will be using more carbon, but some less carbon, but be more promotion of production of electricity. I'm trying to get the words out. By 2035, they're not. Well, how are we going to do that? Because with everybody using electricity in the area, and you're going to be providing more electricity than we're using, that means you're going to create a power station. And I'm not aware we've got any proposal to provide a power station. And even if you literally cover all the buildings with PV panels, I doubt you'll end up being energy in addition to the amount of usage you're going to achieve. So simple things like that, we've got to make sure what we say we're trying to do is actually possible and realistic. Otherwise, we just set ourselves up to fail, and nobody will thank us for that. And the other issue for me, I'm not trying to sort of pick the whole thing apart, because I want to support it, because I think it's important we do these things. But for example, on the waste of materials, if the EDC want to go down the road on the MW5 on page 31 of the pack, they want to explore vacuum waste collection systems. Well, to leave it to medium longer term is unusual, because you would put all that system in the ground before you build the buildings. And if you wait to do retrofitting, it'll become almost impossible. And if you're going to do it, so it needs to be a short-term measure, not medium, long-term, if you're going to have it. But if you're going to have it, then I would suggest you have to discuss it with the refuse collection authorities, Dartford and Gresham, as to what do they think. I'm not aware that conversation's been had, and I know certainly in Gresham, I can't speak for Dartford. If Jeremy's on the call, he can say what he feels for Dartford. But Gresham would have problems with it because it doesn't meet our form of collection at the moment, and we need to understand more of how it works. And the other thing is not taken into account is the government review and the white paper coming out hopefully by the end of this year, next year, on waste collection. What do we collect? How do we collect it? Which will change the collection system for all authorities, which will include the EDC. So I think we need to have clarity around that as to how we're going to collect it and what. But it certainly can't be a medium, longer term ambition if we truly want to do it, because we're putting a line in there that is impossible then to do. So we're going to do it, it has to be short term, and it has to go into the basic infrastructure you put in the ground before you throw the buildings up, is my understanding of it. Thank you, Chairman.
John, thank you for that. Kevin, lots of challenging questions there. Can you?
Yeah, I'll just go back on those two main points. I guess the first one was on the carbon positive. That's why I sort of said it in the outcome recommendations. We wanted to note that we need further work and we need a carbon management plan before we can confirm that that's achievable. So you're very right, John. We need to make sure that's achievable before we can say that. So that's why we've asked to note that we'll need further work before that can be confirmed, whether or not it's achievable. In terms of the vacuum waste system, we would only envisage the vacuum waste system being used in the higher density developments, for example, at Ebbsfleet Central. So I think we've said we would explore the opportunity to use it there. We totally recognise it's not viable in the mainstream, and we did actually talk with Kent, Dartford and Gravesham's waste departments to kind of see what their plans were and what they were doing and what was realistic. And that's why we agreed that if there was a vacuum waste system, it would be for the higher density developments at Ebbsfleet Central, potentially Thames Way, but certainly not to retrofit it into the existing developments at the minute. But we have been very much working with your teams to see what we could do to kind of help and work with them on the existing systems as well.
All right, Kevin.
Look,
John, any comeback on that one?
Yeah, please. I'd welcome to know who you spoke to, because I've spoken to my directors on it, and they're not aware of the conversations. They're concerned about it.
Yeah. We're very happy to share what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Look,
if you take Ebbsfleet Central, for example, John, that's why it says explore. And you are right in terms of the need to explore it is definitely a short-term action. So Jen and the Ebbsfleet Central team are already exploring it by talking to various systems. But I think, as you rightly say, part of that exploration, what we're already learning about the approach is you've got to have the dialogue with the local waste authorities, because it all needs to integrate into your system. So I think that's part of our exploration at the moment as to whether it's possible or not. But the exploration is definitely short term. Implementing it into somewhere like Ebbsfleet Central, you're absolutely right. It's got to go in. If it's going to go in, it's got to go in as part of the early infrastructure. I think in our timescales, when we're anticipating putting the infrastructure into somewhere like Ebbsfleet Central in perhaps 2-3 years' time, that's more medium. So that's why it says medium term for actually installing it. But you're right, the exploration of it's got to be done now.
All right. Look, Kevin, perhaps you can drop John details of who you've been engaging with at Gravesham. I know Jeremy has joined us and Daniel Lord Moylan has also joined us now. So we'll pick that up in the minutes when they joined us. Mark, can we bring you back on the supplementary planning document? And then I'll bring Nick in.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So this came from a conversation at the pre-board session around what our sort of fixes and flexes were. Where could our influence be if you sort of exclude some of the EDC sort of projects that have been delivered directly? Obviously, there's an awful lot of development still to come in terms of the private sector through some of the landowners and the house builders on site. So the action was obviously, just to explore the opportunities to be able to influence some of that coming forwards. Obviously, totally agree. Obviously, Neil, obviously an SPD cannot be sort of approved or adopted by by this board. Obviously, the EDC has in the past drafted other guidance, which depending upon how you then obviously then go through consultation, engagement, endorsements, or ultimately adoption, it could then have different levels of weight. We have been speaking to the planning authorities through across Dartford, and Gravesham to understand what their appetite is just in terms of the agenda generally. So what my intention is, hopefully next month, is to come back with just a short response in terms of where are the key decisions still to be made across Ebbsfleet in terms of particularly the areas of the developments that we are not going to be bringing forward ourselves, and what things are currently fixed in those consents through the outline permissions. How does guidance work with that? How does emerging policy work with that? And then is there a role to play for an SPD in working with that? Obviously, accepting the fact that if there was a value in doing that, we would only be able to do that if the local authorities were happy to be sort of working on that. I think that generally my experience of working on other guidance documents and having this board endorse some of that material in the past around sustainable travel, the design narrative, the public realm, even having those documents drafted has actually been really helpful to sort of assist us in the planning negotiations, even though we haven't actually necessarily gone on to full SPD planning weight. But I will hopefully map all of that out next month.
Thank you, Mark. Nick, can I bring you in, please?
Yes, I was going to. I think firstly, I'll just sort of summarise our thought processes when we were going through this document, we were very mindful of the fact that so far as the environment was concerned, we were not capable of writing SPP ourselves and SPG ourselves, and it was all down to a dialogue with Gravesham and Dartford. So we were very cognizant in our pre-board meeting when we spent a long time on this document. It is absolutely right that it has to be ambitious. We are a garden city, so we have to hold out the prospect for us being an exemplar. So far as the sort of carbon neutral targets are concerned, or indeed carbon positive, through MMC we're already building carbon reduction that's producing outputs of 117%, i.e. 17% positive in terms of carbon, merely by making sure that all the buildings we build are super airtight and hermetically sealed, and we must be targeting that, because what that means is that you're just reliant on the grid to your carbon. Everything you deliver has to be carbon neutral enabled. Therefore, we're then just relying on the grid to be delivering great clean electricity. So far as the waste side of life, I think it's at least number 3 in terms of carbon production. So we have to get that aspect right after heating of the homes. And at Barking Riverside, which adopted vacuum collection, they are saving 10,000 tons of carbon a year. I made a speech on this only recently, and yes, you have to put it in up front, and Ebbsfleet Centre would be an ideal opportunity in that regard for both the commercial and the residential, and because it's a tight site, the degree of the pipe work will be far less expensive than it would be otherwise. At Wembley, we reached an agreement with the local authority because the collection is privately done, not by the local authority, not by Brent in that case. And you need to reach an agreement, and part of that is about how much money on the rates are you actually saving the local authority as a consequence. But just reducing the number of trips of waste lorries throughout the site. It's just a fabulous opportunity, and it has embedded advanced recycling within it. But at the same time, in Kevin's defence, a less ambitious opportunity is the underground refuse systems. And although those are embedded in the original construction, far cheaper to deliver, and particularly when coupled with compactors, there is a great opportunity to deliver a very advanced system, and the streets are so much clearer, cleaner, and environmentally friendly as a consequence. You need to reach an agreement with the local authority as well, but you only need one lorry for a development of the size of Ebbsfleet, and that costs £125,000, and so it's very easily dealt with by a single development like this. That's enough.
Nick, look, thank you. You've been a champion of this. Can I just ask Ian, when will this be advanced? How will the board be involved in the progress of options such as this, linking back into our environmental strategy, specifically with, let's say, Ebbsfleet Central Phase 1? What visibility will we have? What involvement will we have in the development of this potential solution?
Of those sorts of options, yeah. Well, as we'll come on to later in today's agenda, Jen's going to talk about the process that we're going to embark on now towards the outline business case, and through that we're going to be looking at a lot of these options plus many other aspects of the infrastructure delivery, and first through the project board and then to the board itself. We will be reporting regularly on our progress against those, and there will be choices to be made about certain technologies because they'll have cost impact, and so we'll be bringing, I think, at regular intervals, sort of key decisions like that, Simon, where there'll be choices to be made about cost versus perhaps environmental benefit. Not always in that trade-off, obviously, but I mean that's an obvious.
Understood. Look, I'm sure the board is keen to engage in dialogue around such issues and to influence the direction of the development in this regard, in accordance with our environmental strategy and action plan. I think we've had a good conversation around this. We will make sure that absolutely what we are signing up to is crystal clear in the minutes here. We have, for decision, I'm going to assume that we've had a good debate here, but the board is being asked to approve updates to the EDC Environmental Action Plan outcomes, and also we're being asked to agree the principles, objectives and roadmap for delivery as outlined in the Environmental Sustainability Action Plan, including priority actions for 2021-22 and our approach to agree future priorities on an annual basis. So that's the decision we have in front of us. Can I assume that everyone is comfortable with that and supportive? Excellent. Look forward to seeing the minutes, which brings us on to the next item. Kevin, you're in the chair, and this is your next item, Ebbsfleet Living for December 2021.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's been a really exciting month for us in the last period. Really, a lot of our projects we've been working with the community on have come to a culmination in this month, particularly the publication of the Ebbsfleet Welcome document. So over the last 2 weeks, everybody in the Garden City, every home, has received an Ebbsfleet Welcome document. That document includes a number of sub-documents, including, for example, a compendium of information of how you can plan your life here, useful contacts, all the information you need to know about where to go, what to do, things that you might want to get in contact with. Also plans for the Garden City, what's happening to date, what's plans for the next 5 years. That's all included in this document, together with a map, a gardening guide, information about getting involved in Ebbsfleet edible gardens and other things. So it's a real landmark document which has come from many conversations with our community board and with other residents about what they would find useful. People who arrive in the Garden City didn't quite know what was going on and what to do. So this document really will be there as a little compendium that you'll keep on ongoing and hopefully be very useful to people. We plan that the document will be made available to everyone as they move into the Garden City as well. So as they arrive, we'll be having this document provided for them. We've had some really good positive feedback from residents since it's arrived through the doors. It's exactly the type of thing they've been waiting for and hoping for. So again, Miriam and my team has been project managing it with a lot of input from across the organisation. And in particular, the community board has been really, really influential in this. They've helped us shape it. They've helped us tell us what they would find useful, and therefore that's where the documents come from. Also this month we did have a meeting of the community board on the 23rd of November, and one of the key things we were talking about with the community board was how we help them to build capacity for themselves and within the community about how they do events and activities and things for themselves. The welcome pack will help in that, but with the welcome pack we created a document called Create New Memories, and it really helps residents who arrive in the Garden City to think about how they might go about setting up events themselves, setting up new clubs or classes, where they might fund it, how they might promote it, and how they do health and safety and other things. So together I think we've created a real collection of information that will be really helpful to residents and people working in the Garden City to really get involved and to know what's coming, and hopefully it's going to be very useful for them moving forward. Also this month we started to see a sort of flurry of interest in community investment fund bids, which is great to see. Again, people having the confidence to go back out again, obviously within the context of the current restrictions. However, we have been able to make a number of community investment bids to people to carry out activity, particularly in relation to the holiday season and over Christmas. So we've already had a St. Nicholas Day festival with the community group, and this weekend is probably one of the busiest weekends we're going to have in the Garden City for a very long time, where we're having a 2-day Christmas fair at Castle Hill, where lots of local businesses and entrepreneurs are going to be selling their wares within the village centre there. We're going to have a travelling carol service with some of the different church groups who will be travelling around the development. So rather than having one big one, we'll be popping up in every development across the Garden City over 1 and 2 days. And the Dartford Christmas Santa will also be coming to the Garden City this weekend as well. We'll also use the opportunity of the Castle Hill Fair at the weekend to do some consultation on the health and wellbeing hub work which we're developing. So that'll be a stall within the fair, and it'll be very much in a COVID safe way and an outdoor environment. So lots happening over this weekend in the Garden City. Also of note, this month we've started the first of our apprenticeship schemes and are getting involved in construction with the Prince's Trust. So we've delivered on those. And finally, some Enfields have kicked off the This Must Be the Place programme, which is an exciting 3-year programme of getting young people in the Garden City involved in designing and placemaking over the period. So as I say, it was a real landmark month for us with lots of things coming to a culmination and starting off. So happy to take any questions on that.
Kevin, look, thank you very much to you and the team for all of that. A lot of progress, a good update. Board, are there any comments or observations? Nick.
Kevin, could you tell us more about the apprenticeship scheme with the Prince's Trust, and also in the context of the community group meetings that you are running, which sound tremendous? What sort of structure are you putting into that so that it can become independent?
Yeah, so the 2 programs that we've kicked off this month, one was with the Prince's Trust, and it was about getting youth involved in construction. So that was one program. The Apprenticeship Program is a separate program which we're running with North Kent College and the Learning Shop. So the first of those, they're all part of the program and action plan which we approved a few months ago at board, and this is kicking off. And it's really the first attempt at us really getting the community involved in and benefiting from the opportunities, getting them ready for the job opportunities that are going to be coming into the Garden City. So the construction one is very much recognising that the most jobs that will be available to local people will be in construction over the next 2 to 3 years. So therefore, we're helping them get their CSE cards. We're helping them get an understanding of what the opportunities in the Garden City will be. We're helping them to get introduced to some of the potential employers in the Garden City. And I'm happy to say of the 11 people who attended that Prince's Trust event, I'm kind of giving away some of our progress that we're going to report later in the year, but 7 of them have already have secured jobs, and 4 of them in the Garden City. So we're really, really pleased about being able to make those direct connections already. The apprenticeship scheme is where we're bringing together apprenticeships across existing employers in the Garden City, so Care, Countryside, ourselves and others. All of these employers are having apprenticeships programs independently, and what our apprenticeship program does is bring them all together as a collective to sort of understand what the opportunities of the Garden City and the apprenticeships of being an apprentice in the Garden City are. So sort of commonalities of what the Garden City is. Again, we've given them tours of the Garden City. We've been giving them kind of introductions to what the plans for it are in future as well. So almost helping them kind of plan their future and how their career might evolve as the development, the Garden City evolves and the opportunities start increasing. So that's very much the program for that. It's part of that wider action plan, and we agree we bring that back to board every 6 months and sort of update you in detail of what progress we've made against that. In terms of the community group meetings, were you referring to the consultation on the Health and Wellbeing Hub, Nick, or? Sorry, you're on mute.
You started off with talking about the community group meetings that you were having.
Probably the community
Yes.
board thing is
Community
board.
Yeah.
That was it.
So maybe Jeremy wants to come in on the community board.
Yeah, very happy to, and I think members who attend will know that probably the most often repeated comment during it from the chair, and I chair it at the moment, is that we need to be looking forward to a day when the community board is able to set itself free and go off and run this. And so, as Kevin has said, a lot of the work we're doing is actually about building capacity. It's not necessarily, we're not trying to interfere with events, and we're not trying to get involved in the organisation of things. We're trying to build capacity and confidence, and the idea is that the board itself will then fly and take that off. I suspect that John and I will always be, love to be involved in it because it's an important part of our respective communities. But the idea is that a growing number of residents become the steerers and managers of their own future. I guess there is a risk. The risk, I suppose, is when you start off with a small group of people, they themselves become an elite if you're not careful. And so, again, we've been trying very hard in our conversations to make it clear that this is a revolving and an open membership. So I don't think we do have a constitution, but I do think, frankly, if people if people have just arrived in the community and want to join the board, I think there's no problem with us in adapting and flexing to ensure they have a voice and eventually a seat on it. We are looking for useful people doing useful things. And whether that includes councillors, I'll leave to your discussion.
Jeremy, thank you for that. Kevin, thank you. Bob, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, just following on from Jeremy's comment there. I mean, I think the important thing really is the distance we've covered on this. I mean, as you get these reports each board meeting, there is not just more activity, there's a breadth of activity as well, and a depth of activity into the community, which is really impressive. So I do think we've made huge progress, and I agree entirely with Jeremy. It's got to be from the ground upwards, and the local people leading it. But this is a very impressive list of activity. I do hope some of these events don't get interfered with in the next week, given events medically. But it looks a really good list of activity. I got two specifics, Kevin. On para 3.2, you've said there they've lost their instructor for the Sunday Active group, and it just prompted a thought in my mind. Is there a park run close to Ebbsfleet at the moment, and if not, is it something that local people have thought about? Because obviously that's an entire volunteer activity. I don't know whether there is one in Dartford or one in Gravesham that people could join, but if we can't get an instructor, or if they can't get an instructor, just getting people. Parkrun is a fabulous community building event, both the volunteers and the people who turn up, and I just wondered if there's been a discussion about actually having one in Ebbsfleet.
Yes is the answer. I mean, I guess we'd be really keen. There are the one in Dartford already, and we have sort of been talking with Dartford. In fact, we're meeting Dartford colleagues tomorrow about how we kind of improve, sort of some of that access into Ebbsfleet. One of the issues with the 5K run was just getting a safe 5K run within our area at the minute was a bit of an issue. So we're kind of keen that it's certainly a short to medium term ambition. we haven't mobilised it yet, but people have been getting involved in the Dartford one. So the HIT classes have been really, really good because they've been happening every week without fail, and they've been happening outside whenever there was deep COVID. So it is unfortunate for them to lose their instructor, but having talked to Penny and Bart, they're really keen to get somebody else involved early, and we are starting in the new year a Couch to 5K group. So there is Couch to 5K, and we are looking at trying to get a new instructor for the HIT group, and we are looking in the medium term to bring a park run to Ebbsfleet when we can kind of secure a run. And Jeremy and Gravesham have been really, really helpful in trying to help us think about how we improve that and actually build on what there is, because if there's a really good park run running adjacent to us, it's giving people access to it. So that's part of the welcome pack, is actually showing you where there is leisure facilities and where there is things in the existing communities as well. So we don't want people to arrive in Ebbsfleet and just look at their own little patch. We want them to get involved in what's available around them as well.
Bob, Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, Bob, there are 3 park runs in Dartford. There's a main one in the town. There's a junior one that we have now, and we have one that we funded in Swanscombe, so very, very close to Ebbsfleet. I'm not sure whether that's running yet. Perhaps Kevin knows. But one of the barriers to entry for these park runs, I'm sure you know, there's a £5,000 subscription fee which to require them to start, and the need for volunteers. And we at Dartford stumped up for the £5,000 subscription fee for the Swanscombe one, but then COVID hit straight away, so it was pretty much stalled. But there is absolutely there, and we're very, very keen on the Couch to 5K. We're sponsoring them in Dartford well, and in my village we're sponsoring a couch to stay on the couch as well. So that's the kind of village I live in.
That's excellent work you're doing there, Jeremy. Well done. I'm sure you're leading from the front on that one. Thank you very much for that, Bob. Jeremy, I am assuming that we've covered off your points satisfactorily there. So we had the paper in front of us, lots of good work. That is duly for noting, so that is noted. That then brings us on to our next item, Mark, and our communications update.
Hi, Chairman. So there's been a wide variety of media over the last 2 months, both in local and trade press. In all, media was seen by 2.83 million people online that contained the name Ebbsfleet Garden City, and that was across 17 articles. There's been 2 press releases about our consultation for Ebbsfleet Central and the granting of planning permission for the first phase, which was 121 homes of Bellway Homes Harbour Village scheme, which were used by trade and local media, and our release on the Apprenticeship Program and the collaboration with the Prince's Trust also made local radio. On the website, we had 5,228 individuals look at our website in October, and they looked at 14,252 pages, and 7,245 people looked at us in November with 16,151 pages. In December, we usually are hit by Christmas holidays. That's pretty standard, but I've had a look at web figures today, and we're already up to 3,500 users. And we're only halfway through the month. I'm not suggesting that trend will continue, but certainly if it does, then that's a very good month for December. And the board video, which was published on YouTube, Instagram, and our website, was seen by more than 1,200 people. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Yeah, it's a very popular board meeting, that one, compared with previous precedents. So obviously, when we're actually in the offices, it's far more interesting for people. All right, good. That's a great update. Lots going on there. Are there any comments on that? That paper is for noting, board, but any thoughts or observations? All right, that is duly noted. Thank you very much for that. That then brings us on to our next paper, which relates to Ebbsfleet Development Corporation governance. Ian, you're going to take us through this paper.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. As you mentioned earlier, 3 of our existing non-execs, Bob, David and Louise, leave us on the 20th of January. So next month will be their last meeting. And you also mentioned the campaign to recruit replacements is underway. But the timetable for that recruitment does mean that we will inevitably have a gap between January and when the new execs are appointed. So what we've had to do is look at the committee structure and see how we can cover those committees with the remaining non-execs in that interim period. So having spoken to a number of you, we've set out a proposal here for covering making appointments particularly to the Audit and Risk Committee and the Remuneration Committee. The Planning Committee is unaffected by this, and we also have I think it's 3 board champion roles that we would need to get covered. I would stress that we are proposing that these are interim arrangements pending the appointment of the 3 new non-execs. At that point, I think, Simon, we would need to do a full review, because those new non-execs will need to be considered in terms of taking on some roles themselves. So we'll need to do a full review of the subcommittee membership and board roles. So the proposed appointments are set out here in section 7 and 8, and then the champion roles at section 10. I'm hoping that doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, those nominations, because I think I've spoken to everybody, but just needed to bring them here formally for the board's approval.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. I'd just like to place on record thank you to each one of the board members who are stepping up into additional roles during this recruitment process period. But I'm hoping that everyone is comfortable with this and happy to endorse the paper. Is that a fair assumption, board? Would appear to be so.
Yes.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. So thank you for that, Ian. That then brings us on to Mark and our planning and housing delivery report. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So the usual paper from me covering the usual points. So as Mark Templeton mentioned, we had planning committee last month for the Bellway scheme at North East West. So that was approved subject to the legal agreement. So we're hopeful of getting that finalised before Christmas. Hopefully get that out the door. Got planning committee again today at 4 p.m. Seeing another Bellway scheme. We're quite busy at the moment across Ebbsfleet. So there's a scheme that they submitted 138 homes in Alfredon. There's the table in 2.3 looking at the forward plan. We have identified a couple of the community buildings for Ebbsfleet Green potentially for January. We just need to understand from Gredra a little bit about how the spending review and the outcome on that affects them. That's sort of a scheme that EDC corporately have been sort of contributing to some sort of design work, with the idea that could potentially then be looked at sort of to enhance the scheme. So depending upon outcomes from the spending review, could possibly change those dates. Section 3 and Annex A just covers obviously the usual update in terms of the development site. So the market centre at Alfredon is probably the next big application that we're expecting in. Caroline Barker and I are actually seeing the developers for that tomorrow. So we're probably going to have that application in the very early new year. The usual London Resort update, just providing some information for the board in terms of a particular correspondence with the examining authority. We haven't had any particular contact with LRCH or their consultants recently to sort of feedback on. So Section 5 covers a couple of items. So 5.2 and Annex C just refers to the infrastructure funding statement. So that's a paper that all LPAs in the country have to publish by December. It has to be essentially published for a financial year, and then by the December of the financial year beforehand. We actually provided a paper to you guys last December, which was sort of pretty much taking us up to sort of November, December time. So the paper in front of you today covers income and expenditure really for the January, February, March period of 2021, and then it gives you an update in terms of the funds that we are holding. And then the intention is to then bring forward a paper for the period of 21-22, probably around sort of June, July time next year. I was asked to do some more work in terms of housing mix, and particularly around the affordable housing. So I've outlined that in Section 6. And then Section 7, the usual update in terms of completion. So we're at 386. And just a couple of items that aren't included on the paper. We have received notification from Dartford that their local plan was submitted for examination on Monday, so that does give it some greater level of material weight now. And we understand that KCC will be consulting on a change to their minerals and waste plan from tomorrow for 8 weeks. So I'll have a look at that when that gets released. But that's it from me. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Congratulations, Jeremy, for Dartford, for the progress you're making on your plan. Neil, can I bring you in, please?
Thank you, Simon. Well, first of all, well done, Mark, for all that you and your team are doing in bringing forward applications, processing them and engaging with developers. And I think hopefully we're seeing an improvement in quality the whole time. The government is very keen to see improvement in quality, and I hope that through the planning process we'll be able to contribute to that. But I have 3 things I wanted to ask about. Completions 386 to date, forecast January to March 150, but in the past, recent past, we've fallen behind the forecast. I think we've got a bit of a spare month in there though, December, which might help us out. So the first one, and it's probably impossible to say, but are we on target? And I think shall I raise the other 2 points and then you can deal with them all together? Yeah. The London Resort DCO, it's slightly concerning that they don't seem to be engaging in the way that you would expect, or I would expect. You say that update meetings were planned and then were cancelled. Do we have a view on whether they are likely to proceed with full vigour, is really the question there, given the SSSI. And on planning obligations, completely different point. You've got your infrastructure funding statement. And the question there is, are we keeping an eye on any planning obligation where there's a time limit on it? Because sometimes you get a planning obligation that has a contribution, but if it's not spent within a particular period, it goes back. And I'm just saying, can we keep an eye on those time limited ones? So they're the 3 things. So first about completion, Are we going to make it? London Resort and time on planning obligations.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Neil. I think that we are, I think that probably when I was looking at the completion numbers this month, I was probably hoping for maybe a slightly higher number at this stage than 386. I think there are some gaps coming in from, we're expecting some gaps to be filled. So, for example, Taylor Wimpey finished their business year at the end of December, so we're expecting to have some more information from them in January. And we know that they are quite active, obviously, down at Castle Hill South. And there's a little bit of numbers that we need to catch up in terms of Clarion. When we did the full review last month, it was looking sort of tight but okay. And I don't think that probably my conclusion has changed. So we'll obviously have another look when we do the numbers in January. But yeah, no big concerns on that at the moment. LRCH engagements. Yes, I believe that they, obviously, whenever they've been communicating with the examining authority, and I know they've been sort of talking to various different partners in other forums, they have indicated that they have been, obviously doing other work. I think that they have been looking to secure, obviously compensation plans and mitigation, and obviously looking at their sort of package, in terms of a response to the SSSI. We know the examining authority have asked them for 4-weekly sort of reports to update in terms of progress. So we'll keep an eye out for those when they appear on the website. We have obviously said that we're obviously happy to engage, and we've consistently done that through this process. We are well sort of resourced to be able to do that now, just in terms of our sort of setup. The revised information, the consultation information, is still expected through February. So we'll have to see what information sort of gets released and gets provided for informal comment in advance of February. But we are here. We're waiting for a discussion whenever they are. So and the last point, planning obligations. Yes. So Vicky, who works with Gerard, has a spreadsheet that maps all of the money, and there is a column in the spreadsheet that says when it was paid and then when it would then need to be paid back. So we've then got that tracked. So don't worry, that's definitely on the radar.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for those questions. Neil, can I bring in Nick and then Bob, please?
So the first half of my question, Neil can be fully present on because it's about historic stuff. But the second half of my question, I may have to give him 30 seconds warning to turn off or phase out briefly. Historically, we have a large number of consents, and the 30% affordable delivery is, I'm sure, at the bottom end of everybody's expectations and hopes. But to see that 70% of that is intermediate and only 30% of that is affordable rent is an ongoing issue. And do you have any extant financial reviews or on developments of which we are now the planning authority, that either late stage or mid stage financial reviews that we should be implementing? And my second question, which when you reply to, Neil probably needs to turn his phones off or whatever, is do we have any plans to be incorporating mid-stage or late-stage financial reviews?
So in terms of the
I suspect on the second one that I don't, because that's general, isn't it? In relation,
okay.
It's not relation to a specific application. And I think also, sorry to butt in, that Mark would be ruled out as well because the handling arrangements put him in a different category as well. So he wouldn't be able to answer your question.
I'd have to do it.
But I think it's all right.
I'd have to guess.
I'll answer it anyway. It's fine.
Good.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to an expansive reply then.
I'm not sure if I can give that. In terms of the percentage, yeah, I think it's really interesting because a lot of the applications were, for example, at Eastern Crow, where a lot of the homes are coming forwards, did 25% on site with then a financial contribution to then deliver sort of units off site. So I was concerned for quite a while that to even achieve 30% would actually be quite difficult. Going through the planning permission information has been quite reassuring that it then gets to 30. The emerging local plan work is then looking at 35, so around Ebbsfleet Central, and the emerging policy in the Dartford plan for that is then looking at 35. So there is a general sort of shift up. Yeah. In terms of the mix, again, very heavily weighted, between to sort of intermediate products. Obviously, the emerging policies do provide for an assumed split in terms of what some of the affordable sort of provision could be in terms of those areas. Obviously, corporately, if the EDC then wanted to then sort of plug that gap on our own projects, obviously then that's a decision that could be made if there are particular sort of products that we felt was needed in the area.
It is an issue about what sort of place we're building and what we actually need.
I mean, consistently, the councils will report that social rent is always in demand. In terms of the financial review, the only application that we inherited that had financial review built in was at Springhead. That review was undertaken a few years ago, and it was concluded that the viability situation hadn't changed at Springhead. But interestingly, since then, Countryside then actually went on and then sold a fair number of homes to Moat, I believe it was. So actually, then they've sort of increased their affordable housing. Even though the financial review didn't then trigger that. So there aren't any existing ones that we would be able to trigger. Obviously, I mean, again, any new outline applications that could be factored in if we felt that there was a particular problem. But obviously, we are expecting all new applications to be policy compliant with the policy that's adopted. Obviously, at the point of decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mark. Bob, can I bring you in, please?
Yes, Mark, you'd be pleased to know I've only got one more meeting to ask my awkward questions on housing delivery. In section 7, I was talking to somebody about the virtues of Ebbsfleet the other day, and they asked me a question which I couldn't answer, and I was ashamed I couldn't answer it, which was, do we have any idea where the new residents are coming from? And I just wonder whether when we get the information from developers, obviously they do know the addresses of the people who are buying their houses, do they do any analysis of that information? Or do you share it in any way?
They don't share it, unfortunately. It's something that we do ask every now and again. I think that it's been asked at this board before, and probably other meetings that I've been to. Generally, the developers report back that it is still a high percentage. I think is it something like 80% within 10 miles or something like that. They always give a relatively high percentage coming from a relatively small area. Obviously, that area will cover Dartford and Gresham, but equally it would obviously cover some sections of South East London. But generally, they are reporting a highish number from a reasonably local position. Yeah.
Okay, it probably is part of the story as the Garden City goes forward, though, to have some understanding where people have come from. That's all it made me think, really.
Yeah,
it's difficult getting the information, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it is. I mean, whenever I speak to any of the community events, I sometimes a bit cheeky and ask them where they move from, and it is interesting. I met some people once who come down from Oxford, some people come from Essex, but yeah, it is sort of little bits of information, I suppose, rather than necessarily a full picture.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Mark. Jeremy.
Yes, thank you. On that point, you'll imagine, as you might imagine, we're very interested in where the origins of people, and we try to ask, and we do get anecdotal information. I don't think they produce data. What they tell us is exactly the same, that there is a large proportion of first-time buyer or new Ebbsfleet buyers from the local area. But interestingly, they also say that the highest proportion of buyer-get-buyer new buyers comes from farther afield, and particularly London. So what we're seeing is that there's a high proportion of people who, once they move to Ebbsfleet, are bringing other people in with them, families and friends and acquaintances, and the buyer-get-buyer market is actually quite high. So that's good, of course. It means that the satisfaction of the individual householder is good, and they are then spreading the word to others and saying, well, you ought to think about moving down here. So that's an interesting element. I mean, unfortunately, the problem is they haven't got any data. I think they're always very nervous about us using it to maybe dissuade particular groups from coming. I think they want, I mean, when they put a building up for sale, they don't really mind who buys it, and they don't really see the relevance of the data about that once they've got it. So I think that's why they don't share it. But it's an interesting anecdotal evidence that when you meet people in Ebbsfleet now, they will say, well, the reason I came is because my mother moved, my sister moved, my friend moved, and that's a growing area of it, I think.
Jeremy, thank you very much for that. Louise, good to see you.
Hi. Just coming in on Jeremy's point, at Crest, for example, we do track the buyer-get-buyer data, particularly in locations like Ebbsfleet. So, and it is very useful. And so I hear what you say, Jeremy, but I'd be surprised if they weren't tracking that. Because in the context of all your, routes to somebody buying your product, it's quite an interesting one. And as you say, it's such a compounding one, because it's people saying, I really like the place, so much so I want my friends and family to come here, and I like the lifestyle and the transportation. So I just say you could press maybe a bit harder, because I would be really surprised. I mean, unless they don't do it at Ebbsfleet, because it sells itself so well. I don't know. That could be another factor.
I think the point I was making, Louise, is they don't share it. They do track it, and they do know, but what they're saying is they won't share it.
Yeah, I don't know whether there's data issues in that.
Yeah, that is the reason that we've been given in the past. But we can certainly ask the question again. I think another interesting component is the number of people who are moving and then moving again within Ebbsfleet when later phases then come on board as well. And I've seen that happen a few times now, which is interesting.
All right, good. We've had a good conversation on this. Mark, thank you very much for the information. It is to be noted. We are hopeful that we will hit our year-end targets for housing completions. Julia, can we bring you on to the investment plan update?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in section 1, we've outlined the actual expenditure to the end of March, which was just under 5 million. In terms of the next 2 months, which is November and December, I think I previously reported that we had a very back-ended expenditure profile, unusually for this year. Every indication is that we will achieve the high level of expenditure definitely through November and December, and I've seen the invoices to account for our expenditure to get us to that place. So as I say, very busy 2 months, November and December, and then expenditure will drop back off for the last quarter. In terms of where we are. In terms of the programme, I think we've already reported about the business case going through for Ebbsfleet Central. We are preparing 2 more now, and we're in the final stages of that, ready to bring those to January board. I really just wanted to highlight to the board around programme level risks. Obviously, the shortage of supply in the construction market and the costs which we're seeing, whilst it is not a major issue for us at the moment in terms of moving immediately onto site, it is something that we need to make sure all of our business cases are future-proof for in the long term, and that we take into account. And we are still seeing price rises in certain sectors at the moment. The main one, the second risk on the bullet point in point number 3 is the future settlement date for our spending review submission. Every indication is that we will not know what next year's funding is from April onwards until at least February, March time. And we had a very long discussion at the investment panel over this and the risks that presents us, because normally we would be in a position that I would have all the team preparing and ready to go, and making sure we had a seamless transition into next year. So I just would raise that to board's attention to understand that at the moment is probably our most significant risk. In terms of section 4, obviously Ebbsfleet Central we've discussed about. Good progression being made on Thamesway development area, and as I say, we will have 2 strategic outline cases for you in January to consider, and we did take the investment panel through the basis of both those cases. Equally good progress being made on Northfleet Riverside. I would just draw your attention to the electricity work, and obviously we have had visits down on site by the chair as well to that site. So we're making good progress there. We do have to review where the Ebbsfleet Central primary substation is going to go because of the SSSI. Finally, in section 5 are the handling arrangements for the next set of planning applications that we expect to go through. So there are 3 sets of handling arrangements for this board to approve. Just following on from that, health and safety, we've had no on-site work during that period. And then in terms of assets that we've owned, there have been some minor vandalism incidents, which we continue to review to make sure that our sites are safe and secure. Just moving on from that, the recommendations are we would ask board to note this report and approve the handling arrangements which are in Annex A, B and C.
Julia, thank you very much for that. Board, do we have any comments or observations? Nick?
Just I had one minor one, and that was just, Julia, if you could update us, and it may have just passed me by, where we are with on the Blue Lake Cliffs.
In what respect, Nick?
Have all works finished there?
Yeah, so all of the works in terms of securing the cliff face and the netting are complete. We are waiting one sign off from Network Rail to ensure that they're happy. And the only other piece that we will be doing next year is that we have an inspection a year after the works are completed. So we've got that programmed in for next year. But the actual netting is all in place and that there's no one on site.
Thank you.
All right, Julia, thank you to you and the team for everything. On that, we have the recommendation in front of us in respect to the handling arrangements. I'm going to assume the paper is duly noted and that we are approving those handling arrangements. Thank you. Then that brings us on to our finance and operations report. Gerard.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Normal report in front of you. This report shows the position as at the end of November. I'd just like to highlight to board the section 2.6, which does indicate that we are forecasting now an underspend on our operational budget of around 650,000. That's due to the timing of the theme park DCO slipping into next financial year rather than this year. And we've made agreement with the department that because of that budgetary pressure, that we can carry over that amount into next financial year to assist us to properly carry out our due process. The other points just to mention, sections 4 and 5 talk about the recruitment that's going on. And apart from that, as Julia's mentioned, the capital, we've got lots of cash to get out in the next few weeks. So all progressing as normal.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Board, are there any questions here? No, I'm going to assume that that is duly noted. That then brings us towards the end of the part 1 part of our meeting. We had another good series of questions from the general public, and responses to those written questions from the general public will be put on our website. So thank you for that. Keep the questions coming. So that just leaves me to say thank you for joining us today. This concludes the part 1 part of our meeting. And if Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, all of our employees and the board can just wish everyone who's watching this and everyone within the Garden City a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and hope that everyone stays safe and well during that period of time. So you have our very best wishes for the season. So thank you very much. We will stop recording.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.